Hi everyone, Neil Snape here, and I'm glad to show you another edit that I'm going to do on a beauty picture in Lightroom, entirely in Lightroom. I don't think you need to do much Photoshop on an image like this. I will explain some of the reasons behind what I'm doing, and hopefully that'll help you make your editing easier. So let's get started. And I've already selected the image that we're going to go through. Now, it's this image. If I press, of course, E, we'll go into zoom mode, or you could just double click on the image, and that will take you up into the image mode that we have. But this image I had just gone through, so it's already been edited. I'm going to press the D, and now we're in the develop module, and I can show you some of the edits that are done. I was previously in the color control panel, and you can see some of the edits that I've done. But I'm going to make a virtual copy of this image. Really easy and fast. You just press Command apostrophe, or you go right click on it, make a virtual copy. And now that I have two identical, I can switch back and forth, and you can see that making a virtual copy of an image that has edits in it will copy all of the edits that you had previously done. If there are crops or brush strokes or color controls, whatever they might be, they're already included. But in this case, I want to reset it so I can show you how I would do this image from the very beginning. So I'll just press reset, and that will take all of the control settings back to neutral. If I compare the two side by side, I'll press C, and that will take me back to compare module, and you can see the differences. So you can see that essentially I've changed some of the tonality and the densities. I've taken out the green because it was a window lit picture, but going through double pane glass, it adds quite a bit of green into the image. So I've actually changed the tint value of it, and slightly, ever so slightly, the white point. So let's go back to the develop module, and I'm going to check only the one we're going to edit, which is the virtual copy, and I'll click on the area around the border of the image so it selects only that image. Now, as I said before, I always start with the basic panel. Don't know why it didn't go up there, but anyways, Command 1 takes you up to the beginning, or you can just click on basic panel. The reason that I only have one panel open in one of these, you can see that it's checked for solo mode. Solo mode is great when you don't have much space, or you're using a laptop and you want only one panel open at a time. When you're in solo mode, it will only have the panel open that is selected, and it will close all the other ones. Anyways, back to the basic panel. Now, I said that I would make this one slightly warmer, and you can see that it's going to pull in just a little bit of color as I go up towards a little bit higher. Now, the green, the tint, now without using any type of chart or anything else, I can just tell that it's a little bit green in the skin tone. Sometimes the way that you can do that is if you're in a controlled lighting condition, you can actually use the back of your hand and the front of your hand to see your actual skin color if it's fairly close, and you can tell if you need to add a little bit of color or not. Anyways, I'm just going to take this one out and make her a little bit rosier. Now, I like it around there. It's completely subjective. But the only thing that I see that I would like to change, as well as the temperature and tint, is that in the shadows, it's falling off, and this is a characteristic of, I would say, Canon cameras. Nikon also, they introduce quite a bit of neutral tones into the shadows. Well, neutral tones are fine, but sometimes it's better to add a little bit of color, warmth into it. So what we do for that is, this is just a little adjustment. In this case, in this type of image, I think it's nice to add a little bit of split toning. Split toning is false color. You're actually adding color into areas, either the highlights or the shadows. This is not playing with curves or tone controls. This is actually adding color. So you're adding color over top of the image. Now, you don't want to add much. The way I do it is I take the sliders, saturation, and I take it from 0 and I play with it until I add a lot. Now, split toning, you can turn on and off with the little button that's here, or you can turn it off by going to 0 saturation. It doesn't matter what the hue angle is, it only matters what the saturation is. Now, I'll take this one up a lot, and you can see the wild effect. Now, you wouldn't want somebody that red or that pink. And I'm going to take it into a skin tone that's just, when it starts, just to go into a little bit the greens off of the oranges, that it could be an actual natural skin tone. So around there, and you say, that's horrible. Well, of course, that's because I turned it up to saturation extremely high so I could see where I was. Now I'll just whip that back to 0, and then I'll slowly just creep in a little bit of color into the shadows. And I think somewhere around there is probably good. That's fine. Now if you wanted to add the highlights, because maybe you're taking this beige colored sweater into an area that you don't really want to be in, it's the same thing. Just turn saturation way up. You say, that's not what I want. Of course not. And all you want to do is to take out that warmth, take it back out again in the whites. Now, I want to keep it a little bit into the pinks, somewhere just into the blues, pinks. Now, take the saturation, take it back down to 0, and just slowly slide that in until you see that it cracks just a little bit in the highlights. That should be about right. Now, if you want it to be and only affect just the shadows and lesser of the highlights, you take the balance and you just turn it over to the left. Now it's not marked, but actually what that is doing, it's putting a bias into the shadows so that it only affects the shadows. So that means that I'm putting more color into only shadows and less of the highlight color that I added. Now I can play a little bit more with the highlight because it's actually, it has a percentage bias into the shadows, and that means I can add a little bit more until it's just round neutral. That looks good. Now, let's go back to Command 1, and we'll go back to the basic panel. Now, we've already adjusted the tint temperature. The exposure on this picture, it's not bad. I might be able to take it up a little bit. It's hard to say. Yeah, okay, let's take it up a little bit. What I'm seeing here, without changing highlights, shadows, whites, or blacks, is I'm seeing that the saturation, this type of picture doesn't need to be that saturated, so I'm actually going to take that down a little bit in saturation, and certainly the vibrance. Vibrance, it plays mostly in the highlights. So I'm going to take that down until it looks more like a painting rather than an actual picture. You can start to see that starts to get quite interesting around there. Now, saturation. I don't want her to make her look like she's gray, and at the same time, I think I'll take it around there. Now I'm seeing a problem with what split toning I did, so I'm going to go back there and I'm going to say, take this out a little bit more. Actually, I'm going to take out probably that little bit of highlights. And the warm color, I'm going to see if it's not a little bit too... So, if you have some weird and funky thing going on, you can reset them all by double-clicking on the title, or double-click on the actual slider, and it will go back to 0. Now, highlights. We're going to take the highlights up the tiniest bit. Shadow detail, because I see that the hair is just at the limit. You can actually run over the cursor. There are no areas that are actually out of detail or off flat areas of black, but I still think I'll take up the shadow just a little bit. Yeah, it looks around perfect. Now, whites. Let's just play with them just a little bit. In this case, I don't want to make it just alive enough so that the picture starts to become dimensional. It's looking about right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at not so much the tone curves. I think I'll leave those where they are. But I'll go directly to color, because this image I've desaturated a little bit. I've added in split toning for add a little bit color into the shadows in the dark areas. And I'm going to see what happens with basically skin tones, which are red, orange, and yellow. So let's see what happens if I play with the slider. The way I do this is I have it set to all in the color, and I take the slider and I just whack it to one side or the other to see where those areas are going to be affected. In this case, it's really mostly around the lips, which is quite often the case. And since there are no wild makeup colors or anything else, all it's doing is making it a little bit more creamy. If you really want that to become more of a nude makeup, as we call it, nude makeup, take it away from the red hue angle of magenta and take a little bit more into the orange, and you'll see that that'll flatten out a little bit, and that's right about right there. Now, oranges, same thing. You can make her look very strange by going dark and light, and you can see that you don't want to change that one very much. But what I might do is I might just make it a little bit clearer, saves retouching and pores and whatnot, and I might see what happens with the saturation. In this case, I'm actually going to go a little bit more saturated. Not bad. Now, if the color's not right of the orange, you can actually change it here. Yellows, I'm going to see what happens, and you can see it's mostly in the sweater, and it doesn't change much in the face, so you have to decide if you want less or more detail in the sweater. And that's all that there is in the color on this one. Now, since I'm happy with most of the picture, I will just go up to the crop tool, and I'm going to start to crop from one corner. You can see that the lock is on here, and that means that it's going to constrain it to the original crop, which is 2/3 with the DSLRs. It's not the ideal crop for printing in a magazine, but for most of what we do these days, 2/3 seems to be the image format that we use often. Usually, to make an image effective, you keep the eyes in around the top third, and somewhere along there makes the picture about right. So that's about it. You can press R to confirm, or just press the crop overlay. Oops, I did it twice, and that's what happens. So other than that, we're going to do a little bit of brushing on this one, and I always start with my signature in my images is always eyes, so I'll start with the eyes. Now I have a couple presets that I've made, and one of them is called Iris, Dodge, and Exposure. So it has a little bit plus exposure, a little bit less contrast, a little bit plus highlights, and a little bit plus clarity. So I do that with a brush, and I'm using an Apple Magic Mouse, which is fantastic because I can use the scroll wheel horizontal, which is just your finger basically, and I can make it bigger or smaller. Now, feathering, it uses the same shortcuts as Photoshop, so you can do those by hand, or you can use your right and left arrow brackets to increase or decrease the size. I've got this one fairly soft because it has a large edge area. I always leave flow around 90% unless there's some reason why not. Now, as I drag over here, you could say, well, that looks good, but I can't see where it is. Well, you can press O, and O is show mask. And you press O again, and it will remove the mask. I can paint with or without mask. For me, it makes no difference. And you can see that it's got a soft edge, and it's coming out towards there. Maybe I went a little bit too far. If you went too far, press Alt and just remove a little bit of the mask around the edges. That's like painting with an eraser tool. That looks pretty good to me. Since she's got such dark eyes though, I might go a little bit more exposure. A little bit more. That's about right. It's a little bit too funky, but that's a tendency I have to do a little bit too much. Now, you can use Command minus to reduce the size, or you can use your navigator to go back to a reasonable size. Now, I don't want to modify this one anymore, so what I'm going to do is press New, and that way you can choose any one of these. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose just exposure. And I'm going to go up an increment, maybe just plus 10. I'm going to use a big brush, so I used my scroll on the mouse. And I'm especially going to try to lighten just a little bit. Because when you have the light is coming down, it's going to make the volume in the face, which is fine. But it does have a tendency to add a little bit of depth around the eyes. And sometimes, especially with women, you don't want them to look too tired, especially when, in this case, we didn't have a makeup artist. It was just what the girl had. So I'm just going to draw her around, and it's just so slightly brighter. And I'm following the natural lines of light. So I'm not recreating light, I'm just emphasizing light. That's why this is not retouching, this is just creating the image through the use of light and dark density. Now, this is what we also call dodge and burn. Most people do dodge and burn in Photoshop. I always feel that while you're doing this, we're doing this on a raw image, there's more room for manipulation of the image on a raw image than an encoded image that's opened in Photoshop. This is entirely, well, you could say non-destructive because we haven't actually opened the raw. It's not until we export it. Now, that looks pretty good to me. And we're going to do just the opposite on the other side. So I'm going to take -10 and I'm going to shape just a little bit here. And to make depth three-dimensionality, what I'm going to do is add a little bit of shadow underneath. And I'm going to take the size down of this and I'm going to shape there. There is already shadow, you can see that. Not shadow because good lighting is going to do that. And you can shape these areas just a little bit more. So we're only emphasizing, we're not recreating. Recreating in pictures is another story, and you have to be very careful if you're going to recreate light, because if you don't follow the actual lines where it existed, it's going to look very cheap and very bad quickly. Now, this is exactly what we would do on a darkroom print. If we were working in a darkroom, we would actually use our hands. We would add light or take away light in certain areas, and that's why we don't consider this to be retouching. It's just creating an image, giving it a signature. That's about all that we have to do for this image, except for I would like to add a little bit of detail. So I click new, and I have a preset for hair. So it's a little bit more exposure, a little bit less contrast, a little bit more in the highlights, and a little bit in the clarity. It depends on the image. It doesn't work on all images, it depends. And you can do this, just draw a little bit, and it's going to pull out some detail. Now, that detail is important for separation, especially when the hair is kind of melting into the black background. And you can see that if I drew it here where the part is, actually it added a little bit too much lightness, so I just press Alt and I'm going to drag that into there so there's not too much. And if you want to know one of the little trick before I get too far, I'm going to make one more new, and I'm going to take exposure. Notice that I always change the effect. The effect will use or remember the last used setting. Now, exposure was down last time I drew, so this time I'm going to go up a little bit higher. I'm going to see what happens if I draw up, and that was pretty nice. And I'm going to draw a little bit lighter in the lips to draw attention there. And that's it. I'm going to do one more though, because I didn't do that before. I missed that one, and I'm going to add a little bit of volume under the lips. So I drew it in the center a little bit lighter, and there a little bit darker, and that adds detail. Now you could do that here as well, make it a little bit darker, extra volume. I could just follow the natural places where you will have shadow, and I think that's it. So to recap, we changed the tint, the temperature, a little bit of exposure. We didn't add any clarity. We took the vibrance saturation down. We played with split toning, so we added some false color back into the shadows of the image, but we didn't affect the highlights very much. We changed the color controls ever so slightly to make it a little bit clearer in the skin tones on the face, and yet this is not a colorful image, so we didn't have to add much, and I showed you the difference in balance. Now, this image is basically ready. If you were going to open it in Photoshop, you would probably only have to just lighten a little bit underneath the eyes. She doesn't have any lines in her neck, so it's a perfect image. Thank you very much. Subscribe to my channel, and hope to see you again. Bye.